Thank you and welcome everyone to the continuation of our special council meeting for February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day, everyone. What a great way to spend Valentine's Day at a council meeting. I'd like to acknowledge former Councillor Donna Orsatti in her nice red jacket here this evening. Welcome. So we'll now do the rise and report recommendation at 5:30 p.m. Could I have a mover and a seconder, please? Councillor Constantine, Councillor Drodge, all those in favor? That's carried. Now for closed session item number 1, the confidential information received by staff regarding labor relations be confirmed, and that was moved by Councillor, I can't read my own writing. It was seconded by Kenneth Fowler, moved by Councillor Waters. All those in favor? That is carried. And secondly is council session, closed session item number 2, and that was to confirm information received by staff regarding non-union market review. And that was moved by Deputy Mayor Fowler, seconded by Councillor Saunders. All those in favor? That is carried. We're now here to welcome folks from EI for a shareholder review of our wholly owned utilities. And so I would hand it, I guess, right to Mohammed and Tahina, and thank you so much for being with us here this evening. And please, whenever you're welcome, whenever you're ready.
Okay. Oh, lovely. Okay.
I'm sorry, Mohammed, I'm terribly sorry. I was to go to Councillor Waters first to do the land acknowledgement.
Oh, sure,
My
no
apologies.
Of course.
Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you. The town of Innisfil acknowledges that Innisfil is situated on treaty land that is steeped in rich Indigenous history. The town also acknowledges that the land is the traditional territories of the First Peoples of Turtle Island. It is shared between the Anishinaabe peoples of Beaujolais First Nation, Chippewas of Rama First Nation, and Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and we thank them for their generous generations of stewardship. This first meeting place is still home to many Indigenous people, and as settlers, we are grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. The town acknowledges the forced sacrifices that are the foundation of Canadian society today. We dedicate to honoring Indigenous history and culture and committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect for all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit.
Thank you, Councillor Waters. Now please go ahead.
Okay, good evening, Mayor and Councillors. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today to share the findings of our work conducting a shareholder alignment review of wholly owned utility companies for the town of Innisfil. My name is Mohammed Bamani. I'm a partner in EY's government and public sector practice, and I am the national lead partner for local government consulting. I've had the pleasure of working with the town on other engagements before, and I'm excited to have been the lead engagement partner for this initiative as well. I'll be leading our presentation here today, but I'm joined by a few colleagues in person and virtually as well. Tamina Mojadetti was our day-to-day project manager and lead consultant and is here with me to participate in part of the presentation and will assist in answering any questions about our work that you might have at the end. Joining us online are Josh Cole and Babak Agdi. Josh is a partner in our consulting practice and was our subject matter advisor in municipal governance, having previously served on a number of boards, including as chair of the Toronto Transit Commission. Babak is a partner in our infrastructure advisory practice and brings a deep background in the power and utility space. They will also be available to answer questions at the end of our presentation today. Can you just jump to the slide, Kevin? Sorry. Thank you, and one more as well. So this is a quick overview of our agenda. I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction of the work that we did. We're going to go through our current state findings, and then we're going to spend most of our time talking about the opportunities for change going forward, and then we'll open it up to any questions that you might have at the end. Next slide, please. So the town of Innisfil engaged EY to conduct a shareholder alignment review of its 3 wholly owned utility companies. We launched the project and began our current state assessment in June 2023. Through our research, stakeholder engagement, and assessment, we initially developed a current state report which presented key strengths as well as challenges across 3 focus areas: governance, triple bottom lines, and operations. Our findings revealed that the utilities had varying levels of performance and alignment with you, the shareholder. Our current state assessment explores these key findings and provides the contextual factors which may have caused them. For our final report, we developed 3 sets of opportunities which look to address these challenges. The categories of opportunities vary with respect to the complexity of implementation, strategy, and the impact to the entity, shareholder, and residents. The 3 categories are efficiency and enhancement opportunities, which may be addressed with the current construct, within the current construct of those entities. So these may be changes that can be implemented simultaneously or iteratively through continuous improvement. The strategic growth opportunities require more significant changes, are relatively more complex, and may have larger financial and/or operational structure implications for the entities. They may seek to expand investments and business without large-scale changes to the ownership structure. And finally, there are the transformative or restructuring options, which require substantial and transformative changes to the structure, ownership, and operations of the entities. Of the 3, this category will require the most substantial assessment going forward. Next slide, please. Now, you should have already seen our final report that was a part of the package for today, which includes a more in-depth analysis of the current state findings for each entity. For today's session, we'll provide an overview of those findings to set the context for the challenges and opportunities that we'll discuss in the subsequent slides. So let's start with InPower. We found that as the larger and more mature entity, InPower presented less challenges than the other entities that were reviewed. As a regulated entity under both the Ontario Energy Board and the Ontario Electrical Safety Act, we observed that InPower was reported to be fully compliant with its regulatory obligations. However, like the other 2 utilities, it could take more active measures to implement all aspects of the shareholder direction that was issued to it back in 2017. In addition, some areas for improvement have been identified regarding board performance to better align with industry-leading practices. For example, the need for a more diverse board composition and improved longer-term performance management. For triple bottom lines, InPower shows strengths in environmental and employee well-being, community engagement, and customer satisfaction. In addition, it has continued to grow its assets. The opportunities for improvement primarily lie in enhancing cost efficiency so that it can sustain continued growth as well as a need to generate consistent dividends. The shareholder direction seeks dividends, however, did not establish a minimum amount of dividends. And between 2015 and 2022, the entity did not pay any dividends to the shareholder, which was approved by council. It has resumed now payments of those dividends. As the most operationally mature entity, InPower's presented no notable challenges aside from a few concerns raised within the developer community regarding delays and challenges with existing issue escalation and resolution. InPower has already begun to take steps to address those. And as such, the utility's leadership feels strongly about maintaining an arm's length relationship from the shareholder. InServices was established as a municipal services corporation to separate the water and wastewater function from the town, allowing it to increase its debt capacity to enable strategic expansion. The governance findings for InService mirror those of InPower. While it meets its regulatory and legislative obligations with respect to water and wastewater, there is room for improvement in shareholder governance compliance and board composition, which could also benefit from more diversity and more industry experience. For triple bottom lines, InServices is advancing environmental management initiatives and shows strong social and community engagement. Its policies appear to support employee and community welfare. And while the entity shows financial stability, it has been experiencing some increasing operational costs. Most notably, as noted, the entity was established to increase the debt capacity available to pursue strategic investments, such as the expansion to Innisfil Heights. However, InServices has not yet leveraged that debt, and Innisfil Heights is not expected to be completed for another 6 years. InServices operating relationships do require some attention. The entity has a shared services relationship with the town, which is codified in a dated MOU from 2017. The MOU and the current shared services arrangement is not reflective of the realities of the entity or the town, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we talk about our opportunities going forward. The governance findings for In-Services mirror those of InPower. While it meets its regulatory and legislative obligations with respect to water and wastewater, there is room for improvement in shareholder governance compliance and board composition, which could also benefit from more diversity and industry experience. For triple bottom lines, In-Services is advancing environmental management initiatives and shows strong community and social engagement. Its policies appear to support employee and community welfare, while the entity shows financial stability. My apologies. I started at the top of this page. Apologies for that. Enterprises is where we should be talking about next. Of the three entities, Enterprises is the least developed. It was created for dual purpose of providing community benefit and generating profit. However, the entity has no FTEs and has a shared CEO and CFO with the other two organizations. While it was assigned a full-time CEO for a limited time, this decision was reversed once no substantial growth in business was observed. The entity has had some growth, but it has been slow and at limited profitability. Similar to the other two entities, there is room for improvement with respect to shareholder governance, compliance, and board composition. And Enterprises is now in a position of financial loss as of 2021 and faces high levels of debt, which puts the continued financial sustainability of the entity at greater risk. As I mentioned, our report goes into much greater detail on all of those, on all of that in the current state section of the report. Next slide, please. So based on the review we conducted, comparisons to leading practices and experiences of the firm and our subject matter advisors, and significant engagement with the town and the leadership teams of the entities, our report details a series of opportunities that we will briefly walk you through. This slide presents a summary of the opportunities within each of the categories I described earlier: efficiency and enhancement, strategic growth, and transformation, and the entities to which they apply to. Several of the opportunities apply to all three entities, given the shared constructs for governance and shareholder relationship, and that has been a key focus of this review. At this time, I'm going to invite Tamina to step up, and she's going to walk you through the efficiency and enhancement opportunities and those for strategic growth.
Thank you, Mohammed. So we'll start with the efficiency and enhancement opportunities. Next slide. There we go. Opportunities identified here may be addressed within the current construct of the entities and are unlikely to require any significant restructuring of their current framework. They may be implemented simultaneously or iteratively through continuous improvement, and there's a total of 6 opportunities listed in this category. Next slide, please. The first opportunity is to enhance shareholder direction and oversight. We found that deliberate and intentional adoption of shareholder direction was a challenge across all 3 entities. A joint shareholder direction document was issued for InPower and Enterprises, and while the subsidiaries did not take active measures to implement all aspects of that direction, EY's assessment revealed that their existing practices are partially aligned to that direction in varying capacities. There are a number of factors which impeded the adoption of that direction, as outlined on the slide up in front of you, including limited enforcement mechanisms and implementation expectations, and limited follow-up and guidance from the shareholder. To improve alignment of the entities with shareholder direction, a refresh of the direction documents as well as the approach is required. Several opportunities have been identified to better align direction as well as entities' performance with current shareholder expectations as outlined on this slide. These including enforcement and accountability mechanisms such as mandatory report backs on implementation and adherence to direction, establishing reporting requirements which are more reflective of the actual purpose of reporting, the regulatory environment, the stage of maturity, and the arm's-length nature of the subsidiary, and increasing the prescriptiveness of dividends, a policy to better align with shareholder expectations, such as a minimum expected financial return that's not simply above zero. Next slide, please. Through our review, we also uncovered opportunities to enhance board governance to better align with leading practices. An important consideration to note is that there is no set gold standard to follow. Across the industry, there are a multitude of approaches with respect to composition, skill sets, and tenure. Observations we have made here reflect what we commonly see in board governance for similar organizations. Based on this, the following were identified as areas which may be enhanced for Empower in services and enterprises. Greater clarity is required regarding roles, responsibilities of members, particularly if they overlap with other roles they may hold. Additionally, there are limited enforcement and assessment mechanisms of the required qualifications. This was attributed both to process as well as available pool of nominees. The recruitment processes outlined in the direction documents are not as prescriptive as is recommended by leading practice. So to better align each subsidiary's board governance to leading practice, we suggest revision of the documentation and processes which guide board governance. Several opportunities were identified to improve board governance as outlined in this slide, but some of the key examples include establishing more robust term and reappointment limits. Rotating board chairs can help to balance that need for adequate turnover of directors while still maintaining continuity. Enhance and better document the nomination process. For example, by leveraging a skills matrix to assess skill requirements, the town may also consider using a recruitment firm to identify any additional talent. Pursuing a diverse and inclusive board composition. This refers to both skills, experience, perspectives, background, reflecting the nature of each corporation. Next slide, please. Next is to enhance governance, onboarding, and orientation. Onboarding across all three utilities is primarily currently conducted through a series of meetings and a provision of an extensive number of documents, which you all may know too well. Onboarding is key to effective governance. As the board and council change over time through attrition and recruitment, the governance members in each of the committees may have varying levels of knowledge and understanding of the sector and subsidiary. For example, the current council at the town of Innisfil is mostly comprised of newer members, as you may know, and as such, a thorough and effective onboarding process is critical. There is an opportunity to enhance this onboarding experience by refreshing and modernizing the approach. This can help to foster clear understanding of roles and responsibilities, the subject matter, and enable more effective decision-making and governance. The utility and town may wish to establish an interactive onboarding and orientation module which newly appointed board members and councillors can complete at a pace that suits their needs. Town and subsidiary staff should also be made available to address any questions which the orientee may have. Careful consideration should be given to the information and detail included in the module. Additionally, a phased approach should be considered, which spans over a particular window of time so that it's not all condensed in a short window. Next slide, please. Next is to enhance the operational structure and relationships for in-services. The organization's current operational relationships and constructs presenting challenges and inefficiencies, which Mo pointed to earlier. A number of factors have contributed to this friction, which includes an outdated shared services arrangement and MOU, which was established for an early stage of the subsidiary. The current agreement has limited accountability mechanisms for in-services, as well as limited ability for in-services to enforce service-level expectations for the town, and has a cost structure and service structure which doesn't reflect the current realities of either organization. To enhance the existing operational structure and relationships, the town and in-services should complete the refresh of the MOU through a collaborative approach. The revised MOU should also consider costs, processes, and service-level agreements, which are more reflective of the realities of both organizations and also allows for future evolution through a regular cadence of review and refresh. Next slide, please. Next is financial sustainability for InPower. The utility's financial performance is adequate. However, some of the metrics as outlined on this slide point to opportunities for review and potential improvement. These include the return on assets and equity, which have seen declines since 2020, and some recent increases in operating expenses. Simply, Empower may seek to improve its financial profile by increasing revenue and improving its cost base. Potential pathways to greater sustainability include increased focus on regular review of financial results to determine drivers of cost increases, exploring efficiency opportunities to reduce operating expenses where possible, and leveraging debt capacity to reduce the weighted average cost of capital. Next slide, please. And finally, the financial sustainability of enterprises. So from 2020 to 2022, Enterprises has been operating at a significant financial loss, and the overall financial sustainability is at great risk. The entity has seen negative gross profits and operating margins, so negative 30%, negative 44% in 2022, and high operating to revenue costs, as well as an overutilization of debt capacity. The opportunity here, our report identifies a few opportunities which may improve financial sustainability of enterprises within the current scope of business and services. These include identifying revenue-generating opportunities within the same business lines or industry, defining and setting financial targets, and pursuing regular review of operations against these targets. For example, pursuing a reduction in debt financing costs where feasible. This wraps the efficiency and enhancement opportunities. Next slide, please. Next are strategic growth opportunities. These opportunities require more significant changes. They're relatively more complex and may have larger financial or operational structure implications for the entities. These opportunities may seek to expand investments and business without large-scale changes to the ownership structure. 3 strategic growth opportunities have been identified in this category. 2 are for in-services and 1 is for enterprises. Next slide, please. First is to dissolve the shared services arrangement within services. As previously mentioned, the current operational relationships and construct of in-services is presenting challenges and inefficiencies. In addition to what was mentioned earlier, as both organizations grow, the efficiency of having a shared service may diminish over time and create unnecessary overhead costs and the need for agreements and revisions. Furthermore, it exacerbates governance challenges as the subsidiary and the town have to navigate this dual dynamic of peer-to-peer and parent-to-child relationship. As an alternative to or in conjunction with the refresh of the MOU suggested in Opportunity 1.4, which we reviewed earlier, in-services in the town may pursue the dissolution of the current shared services agreement. You may consider dissolution of all shared services, except for what's required to be retained based on legislation, or only the shared services functions which are no longer efficient and present challenges. But do note that in-services as a water and wastewater municipal services corporation will remain under the legislative requirements of the Municipal Act. As such, any service provision by in-services or other entities, if you're contracting or pursuing shared services with another entity such as Empower, must consider implications of the Act, for example, regarding procurement. Additionally, collection and remittance of development charges can only be carried out by a municipality. So a few considerations if that is to be taken place. Next slide, please. Next is to enhance financial sustainability of in-services. While the subsidiary indicated that it intends to leverage debt in the future, currently it is underutilizing debt, bringing into question the rationale for establishment of a separate entity, as the primary objective for establishment was to benefit from this increased debt capacity to service strategic growth opportunities and the associated overhead costs of having a separate entity. Key financial areas which may be improved include profit and operating margins, return on assets, and increasing operating costs. In addition, the entity is underutilizing its debt capacity, as mentioned. So it currently has 0.09% debt to 99.91% equity. In-services may seek to improve its financial sustainability by increasing revenue, improving its cost base, and having the right mix of debt and equity for growth. Opportunities for consideration include exploring efficiency opportunities in operations to reduce operating expenses. This may include frequent review and reporting of trends in operating expenses to identify areas for optimization, as well as regular review, enhancement, and digitization of business and operational processes where feasible. Leveraging existing debt capacity, as mentioned, for tapping into growth opportunities is another area that services may look into. Next slide, please. 2.3 is business line and service area expansion for enterprises. Enterprises has a dual purpose of providing community benefit as well as pursuing profit-generating businesses. The shareholder direction provides a general direction about the line of businesses the entity may pursue. However, the entity has not yet been able to submit a business case that the shareholder, yourselves, has deemed viable or feasible just yet. No further specific direction or investment from the shareholder has been received regarding business expansion into new areas. So to pursue a path to profitability, enterprises must consider expanding its businesses and or its service area, and should do so by submitting business cases aligned to shareholder direction. It may also seek to expand into new business areas. Not all opportunities listed out here on the slide may be easily implementable, and some may have high costs or high risk as well. As such, it is suggested that enterprises may assess the feasibility and cost benefit of the opportunities outlined here. These are simply just a list of things to consider. Some of them include smart grid technology, home inspections, and energy audits. EV home charging rental programs is another area. So these are just a few examples to take a look at. I'm now going to pass it off to Mohammed to walk us through the transformative and restructuring options, which is our third and last category. Next slide.
Thanks, Tamina. Just on to the next slide there, please. So finally, we come to transformative and restructuring options. The prior two categories provided opportunities for addressing specific challenges, and as such, they are more analytical, whereas the options here look to large-scale change and require substantial discussion regarding the purpose of the subsidiaries. Next slide, please. First are opportunities for untapped efficiencies and future growth through multi-utility models. So the three utilities have a common shareholder, executive leadership, as well as some overlapping board members. In addition, they each share staff to some capacity. In the current approach, there is a degree of inefficiency which may arise from duplicative processes and roles. As opposed to only pursuing efficiency and enhancement opportunities, the town may consider more transformative options, which may drive efficiencies and help to accelerate future growth and innovation across the entities. Pursuing a multi-utility model, which merges two or all three of the entities, may result in operational efficiencies and cost savings, which may help to improve long-term financial sustainability. This new structure may enable synergies, shared resources, streamlined governance and management, improved borrowing leverage, and common financial reporting. As you can see, there are a number of potential combinations, such as merging InPower and InServices or merging InPower and Enterprises. Irrespective of the combination under consideration, the value for the shareholder and legal ramifications will need to be further explored as part of pursuing this option. Next slide, please. To separate the regulated entity InPower from other subsidiaries, the entities could be merged as distinct entities under a common holding company, as is the case for multi-utility model entities such as Utilities Kingston, Public Utilities Commission of Sault Ste. Marie, and Halton Hills Community Energy Corporation, as illustrated on the slide, in comparison to the existing ownership structure. Next slide, please. Next is to consider the sale of InPower. The primary objective for establishing InPower was to create a revenue stream for the shareholder that would be equivalent to the income that would have been generated if the Electricity Commission from which InPower originated had been sold. However, the entity, with council endorsement, did not pay dividends for several years and has recently resumed payment of those dividends. We discussed earlier opportunities to address these challenges within the current state, such as introducing minimum expected dividends. However, the town may also wish to pursue a more transformative option. The shareholder may choose to divest of InPower and receive an immediate return, and may consider the sale of all or a percentage share to another utility company or investor and reinvest the gains from the sale into other municipal priorities and services or into higher yielding and more guaranteed investments. Additionally, this could reduce overhead associated with owning and managing a utility, as well as provide an opportunity to further de-risk investments. If there is appetite to pursue this option, it would require detailed assessment and community engagement to determine and validate the cost benefit. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, In-Services was established as a municipal services corporation to increase the debt capacity available for water and wastewater investment than it would have had as a department of the town. The entity has yet to leverage the increased debt capacity to date, and as mentioned earlier, the expansion into Innisfil Heights has been slow and is delayed. In addition, the town currently provides certain corporate functions to the entity through a shared services approach. This operational relationship, combined with the governance capacities of the town, with council and administration as delegates, has resulted in some operational friction and some inefficiencies. This opportunity explores the potential dissolution of In-Services and the reabsorption of the functions into the town. The town of Innisfil may consider reabsorbing that function into the department as it had been prior to the establishment of In-Services as a municipal services corporation. A thorough evaluation of this option is required to determine impacts to current and future projects, as well as the town's long-term strategy and growth goals. This may help to reduce the associated overhead costs for operating and governing a separate entity, with no impact to financing requirements as the increased debt capacity has not been leveraged yet. Additionally, it may eliminate the operational construct and relationship complexities which have arisen through the shared services agreement. Next slide, please. Now, in contrast to the previous option, here we discuss a regional utility model for In-Services. As we have mentioned, the utility currently provides water and wastewater services to over 12,000 households, including those in Bradford, West Gwillimbury. However, there are servicing constraints in nearby communities, including BWG and New Tecumseh, which currently pose a barrier to growth and expansion. As the town and the surrounding municipalities grow, there will be a need for increased collaboration efforts and opportunities to pursue efficiencies by coordinating service delivery with neighboring municipalities and water/wastewater utilities. Additionally, as the utility continues to grow and maintenance requirements on existing assets grow, there will be an increased need to find capital efficiencies to improve and or maintain the return on assets. The town and In-Services may consider transitioning to a regional utility model to meet future needs and align with the increasing trend towards regional service delivery efficiencies. Key features of a regional utility model could include cross-boundary service collaboration and governance, and evaluation and consolidation of infrastructure. I would add that attention towards the regionalization of water and wastewater services is picking up steam across the province, particularly within the region of Peel, where the governance and operating model for those services is now under the microscope through the passing of Bill 112. Next slide, please. Our last opportunity is around the dissolution or sale of enterprises. As we discussed earlier, from 2020 to 2022, Enterprises operated at a loss and overall financial sustainability is at risk. In the current state of its operations, the entity's spending is exceeding revenue, not leaving sufficient funding for reinvestment into the entity for sustainment, as well as growth of the business. In addition, while the entity has grown its asset base in existing line of businesses, it has not begun expansion into profit-generating lines, which can serve as a revenue stream for you, the shareholder. As an alternative to pursuing improvements to the subsidiary's performance, as outlined in prior opportunities, the shareholder may choose to divest. The town may consider dissolving or selling all or part of Enterprises to another utility company or investor and reinvest the gains from the sale into other municipal priorities, investments, and/or services. This opportunity will require further assessment, including financial valuation, market sounding, community engagement, and development of a decision criteria to assess against the interest priorities and long-term strategy of the town. Next slide, please. So that concludes the opportunities that were identified in our work, in our presentation. All these opportunities have significant merit, but before pursuing them, there likely needs to be a great deal of discussion and deliberation around the town's strategy and what they're looking to achieve with these entities before choosing a direction. With that, my team and I are happy to answer any questions you might have from our report, and I'll invite Tamina to join me up here to help answer some of those questions.
Thank you so much. That's a lot of information to take in, but we really appreciate your work. So I'll go to council now for questions or comments on the report. Deputy Mayor Fowler.
Thank you, Your Worship. Two questions come to mind initially. One regarding the expansion of Innisfil Beach Road, the water sewer system up to Innisfil Heights. Has it been taken into account the issues that arose with the county as well that delayed the project and what would cause these significant costs? And the second question I have is, my understanding is InPower, is expanding beyond the Barrie border, servicing their lands. Are the increased costs because we're establishing the network and the grid up in that direction as an initial cost that can be recouped at a later time? Or is it more of a upper level management issue that we're dealing with?
Sure. Through the mayor, I'll try and give an answer to the first one, and I might ask Tamina to speak to the second one. For the first one, we did not get into the detail of individual projects and their impact of that. Our review was at a higher level for the organization as a whole, so we didn't get into that level of detail about that specific project. For the expansion to Barrie.
The expansion to Barrie, yes. We didn't get to that level of detail around expansion. Around the costs for InPower, as you may have seen on the slide, we noted that the operating expenses increases require further review as to what's the driving factor. We've heard a few things of some of it being driven by inflation and the recent economic situation. So we haven't done a detailed analysis. What we saw is where the costs are being driven from. So that's what we've pointed out to. However, in terms of whether there are some of those additional factors, we do not have that.
Follow-up? Go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Your Worship. In this situation, then, would you be returning at a later date with a finer detailed report on the matter, getting further down to the nuts and bolts, so to speak? Or is this just to be expected at this level and then we work within our system, I guess?
Yes. So this, through the mayor, so this concludes our scope of work, what we've done. So this is the report that you received is our final report. I would suggest that my suggestion, as I said earlier, to determine what options you're going to take is going to require some discussion as to what the town strategy is. And I think that would perhaps dictate the next level of detailed analysis or investigation that you might want to do from there. But as far as our current scope, this is where it ends.
CEO Jershow?
Thanks, Mayor Dillon. Maybe what I would add is, we want to ensure collectively that council has all the information it needs about these issues, about the opportunities and so on. So for example, extension of services to Innisfil Heights is very often discussed at the In-Services Board. Because of the fact a decision had been made to extend servicing in conjunction with the county's road project for County Road 21, it creates, an integration of the county's project versus In-Services project. So in that sense, yes, it's on our minds all the time. So I think what EY is bringing us is kind of the strategic overview and a bit of an objective third-party analysis of where things are at. We will help bring to council some of those, more detailed points. And of course, if you have questions, we'll make sure they get answered.
And the only thing I would add to that, Deputy Mayor, is because there was some challenges with one phase of the project between the 20th and County Road 4, that didn't interfere with any phases. Any of the other phases continued on with the time frame that they were originally meant to. Other questions or comments? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. One thing I didn't see much of, I saw lots of financial sustainability, governance, which are all good things, but I didn't hear much about community benefit in terms of those services which these entities provide. And so just can you comment on that in terms of the other things that these organizations provide to us besides the ones that were mentioned in the report?
Yeah, so in our report, we note a few that each of the organizations do it a bit differently. So, for example, with respect to in-services, community benefits sort of baked into their mandates, something they consider. They do a lot of community outreach and engagement. So each of them do it at a different degree and level. Our focus around the opportunities tended to shift more towards governance because that's where we saw a lot of the challenges and issues. So we didn't get down to the minutia of what are the specific initiatives they should pursue. We looked at among similar organizations, they were operating at about what's expected of those organizations, so they don't go above and beyond what we see in other places. So it's at a base level, and a lot of their ESG or their triple bottom lines is more internally focused. So it's their employee well-being policies that we looked at that showed that they were focusing on that area as well.
My second question, when people think of shared services, they always think that we're saving money, and that's why they do it. But in your report suggests that that might be getting in the way of actually saving. Could you maybe explain that to me? Because I found that a bit difficult to understand, and so I thought I'd explore the opportunity. How does that happen when you expect to save money because you're sharing opportunities, but now it's not?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, and that's a common view of shared services is that it is an opportunity to reduce the number of resources because you are essentially sharing arms and legs across the board. The reality is that there are a lot of barriers to having a successful shared services relationship, and so the arrangement that you have, or the construct as we call it here, has to be complete, which includes processes, service levels, and so on. And what happens is that if service levels are not met, or timing is not there, or the processes are very disparate between all these organizations, what you might have is a finance process that is different between a number of entities, and that creates inefficiency. So it needs to be well thought out, it needs to be well planned, and it needs to run in a certain way. And our observation is that where it's at right now, it's not performing that way. And that could be legacy, it could just be over its evolution. Generally, shared service arrangements need to be revisited to make sure that they are achieving what they need to achieve.
And I think that's what you recommend is some sort of review of all that so that you can update all those things. One last question, then I'll let somebody ask some other questions. You mentioned something in the report called PIL, P-I-L, which was taxes on sale of utility. Could you explain how that works?
I might point that, if Babak's on the line, to explain that a little further.
Babak, you there?
Perhaps while they're getting Babak to answer that question. Oh, I'm getting some feedback now. I'm going to ask a question, and then we'll answer, if you could answer Councillor Waters' question after that. So you mentioned earlier the propensity for the Ontario government now to be looking at the Peel Region model or other models that include, regional servicing or municipal services corporations. Councillor Ices and I were recently at a conference where there was a session on municipal services corporations, and it was actually an encouragement for municipalities to go into municipal services corporations. There seems to be that push from the government to do that. So can you just explain to me then if we were hypothetically to follow the dissolution model, how that might appear to the province who's telling people to go in an opposite direction?
And you're referring, sorry, through the mayor, you're referring to our option that talks about a regional expansion, right? I think so. I don't think the province. So my impression is that there hasn't been anything definitive from the province. Is that the model that I guess to step back, Bill 112 was somewhat recalled, so there isn't a full dissolution of the region of Peel, but they are looking, the letter came out from the minister a couple of weeks ago that said there are components that we are going to transform and they all relate to public works. And the area around water and wastewater was one to be looked at in terms of a different governance model, possibly as a municipal services corp. And they are doing that review right now. And it's not dissimilar to what you've already done with in-services, where you've taken it out of the town and made it a municipal services corporation that allows it to have better debt capacity. That's one model. It becomes a little bit more complicated, I would suggest, when the boundaries expand your current boundaries. Like you are the shareholder for in services. If you were to, I think the complicating factor that the province is really starting to think about when it comes to regionalizing that is it's not restricted to borders, which means the ownership and the governance around that municipal services corporation gets a little bit more complicated. And what that actually means, I think, is still being studied. So that's why, for us, we'd suggest that is an opportunity. It's an opportunity that's really being looked at in another jurisdiction. Perhaps that's something to keep an eye on to see what the outcome of that study is.
So if I were to compare it to a utility like Electra, who has like a board member from the city of Barrie, a board member from wherever, I guess it would be, I don't know what other municipality, I think Guelph is involved there. I don't know whether they have a seat on the board. And then, of course, Vaughan and Markham and the other larger players. And then they would work, they have independent shareholders as well as municipal shareholders?
It could be something like that. And I'm going to ask Josh to kind of weigh in here, who's now online there. I will say from the work that we've done before, that I'm sure he'll say, is that there is no gold set standard of what governance looks like. It needs to be determined at the creation of the organization. And so there are a lot of options, but I'll let Josh get into that before we go back to the back.
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. Nice to see everyone and meet everyone. My name is Josh Cole. I'm Mohammed and Tamina's team in our public sector practice here at EY, and I do a lot of work with governance and looking at models like that, and served on boards in municipal services corps. And so I think what you tend to see is where municipalities often land is a bit of a hybrid model. To Mohammed's point, there isn't like a leading practice. And so typically you see where there's a desire to have some level of direct kind of control or accountability from elected officials, but recognize you might want to round that out with skill sets and experiences that aren't found at the table. And so you start to get that hybrid model. But you see a lot of variety. In EPCOR in Edmonton, for example, it is all kind of external directors, right? So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. But in many instances, the governance is further removed than, say, the direct accountability and control that you would have with an organization that sits within the municipality.
Can I ask one more, and then I'll put it back over to you, Councillor Waters? So you brought up EPCOR, which is a great example. So as I understand it, they're solely owned by the City of Edmonton. And Edmonton was looking for an anchor tenant for a new building downtown to help revitalize their downtown. And EPCOR became that tenant, not because it was the best corporate move to be in that building because it was more expensive, but because they're, trying to not only benefit the corporation, EPCOR Corporation, but also the shareholder. Is that correct? Do you know?
Well, first I have to say we're actually tenants at the EPCOR building in Edmonton. That's where our EY offices are. But yeah, I think there was part of a broader kind of mission and vision. Just we've done a lot of work in Edmonton as a bit of a revitalization of downtown. Because they're the sole shareholder, there was an opportunity there to drive beyond just residential, some commercial and office space into downtown. So a nice added benefit. But I think at no point would the city be able to mandate that of course sets up shop there. I think as a good citizen and recognizing who their shareholder was and what their broader objectives were, they found it with themselves to kind of situate themselves downtown there.
Thank you so much, Josh. I had no idea. I stepped right into that one. Councillor Waters, do you want to repeat your question for Babek, please?
Thank you. In the report, it talks about PIL, which is taxes on sale of utility. Could you tell me how that works and how large are the taxes when you sell a utility?
Hey everyone, Babak Akdai here. I'm also with EY supporting Mohammed and the team on this engagement. PIL stands for Payment in Lieu. So the way it works is if we step a couple of decades back, the government of Ontario owned all the assets in the province related to electricity sector. These assets were transferred from province to municipalities. With the asset was a lot of debt. That was basically the driver behind the transfer of the asset from province to municipalities. Because all this debt was downloaded, these entities were exempt from a typical corporate tax. And a regime was created for that. It's called Payment in Lieu of Taxes, or PILs. What the province does is they do not collect tax on a typical business corporation activity from these entities until the full amount of debt that was transferred from the province to the municipalities retired. So that's how the framework works in general. In terms of what it is specifically for Innisfil right now, I cannot comment on that. It depends on how much was the original amount, and over time, these PILs payments are accumulating. So an analysis, the proper tax analysis is required to look at the accumulation of your debt payment to the province over time and see how much of that is retired, how much of that is remaining. When an entity is being sold from a municipality owner, a municipality shareholder to private sector, this gap should be paid back to the province, basically. This is only applicable to a municipal owner, not a private sector owner. And there is a threshold for that. The threshold is 10%. So you can sell up to 10% and remain in the PILs regime. If you sell more than 10%, you get out of the PILs regime, and you have to settle that difference that's accumulated over time. This is how conceptually it works. Sorry, I'm not able to give you a full number on what it is in your case, but it's a big kind of a obstacle for large entities to get out of the payment regime, because whatever equity you receive from the sale proceeds, you have to use it to settle the amount of the difference that sits in your PILs environment.
Thank you. I'll have to sit on that one and digest it a little more, but thank you. Oliver, go ahead.
Go ahead, Oliver.
Thanks, Mayor Dolan. Maybe just to supplement what Babak said, and at the risk of oversimplifying, I think you could think about it. You may not get the sticker price when you sell the company. There may be a discount due to these tax factors, and that's why if council wanted to pursue that option, we'd need to do quite a bit of homework to do that analysis and see what the actual net return would be, or the net revenue, as opposed to the sticker price.
Thank you.
I'm aging myself, but when I was first on council, we had to make that decision to accept all that debt from what was at that time Cookstown Hydro to InPower, or it was Innisfil Energy Services at the time. Questions or comments? Councillor Ices.
Thank you, Worship. In analyzing the report, you mention a lot of other municipalities. I'm just wondering about the methodology that you used in analyzing the three utilities and how much you use other places as benchmarks. Are there benchmarks that our utilities should be aware of or looking towards? And on top of that, how do you kind of equalize the different municipalities when, Innisfil has a certain geography, a certain amount of people. You mentioned Kingston, different demographics, different number of people. How do you layer all that information to come up with these recommendations?
Sure. So I'm going to start, and then I'm going to ask you to kind of jump in.
Yeah.
So generally, when we do this type of work, I wouldn't say this was a benchmarking study at all, because benchmarking means there's an absolute set process or metric, and how does everybody compare to that? The reality is that a colleague once told me that one size fits nobody, right? So we are comparing ourselves to many others, and there's lots of caveats and differences between them. So what we try to look for are situations that we can learn from, not necessarily to compare. Benchmarking implies we're either better or worse than what that standard is. That's not the type of analysis we did here, because they are too substantially different. There's too many different factors with respect to geography, with respect to economy, and so on and so forth. So we look for examples that might be similar to our situation that we can learn from and see if they apply and that we can take from. That's generally how we do these types of things, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what we did for the municipalities here.
Yeah, that's exactly actually the thinking that we had as we looked into different opportunities. We also looked to see, for example, for expansion opportunities, if we're suggesting something like a multi-utility model, let's take a look at a few other multi-utility models and assess what are some of the things that they do with respect to board governance, with respect to how they pursue their shareholder governance, for example, what are programs that they have, what is the construct that they're under, or in terms of their ownership structure that you may think of. So when we looked at the multi-utility model, the concept of using a holding company came from that. So it was less about benchmarking, but more so looking at what's out there, and how are others dealing with certain challenges that you may also face. So you'll see it littered through, and it's a lot of just research. Another thing that we did do, however, for NPower, when we were trying to see can we pull somewhat comparable, is looking at the OEB scorecard. So they tried to do a little bit of that, apples to apples, but it's still not exactly one for one. So that's why you won't see in our report where we say XYZ is performing better in this area or that area. We'll point to Public Utilities Commission of Sault Ste. Marie does their onboarding like this, and maybe this is something for you to consider, for example.
Thank you, Councillor Ices. Any other questions or comments? Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Worship. I want to seek some clarification on MSCs, like multiple MSCs, in terms of, is in-services an MSC right now as the way it stands?
Correct.
So it is. So what is the difference between an MSC and let's say a PUC, a Public Utilities Commission? Is the Public Utilities Commission a multi-utility, or is it an MSC?
Yeah, I think we'll ask Josh to maybe chime in there.
Sorry, I just had to take myself off mute. So really our two distinctions in this space, and it really you can give them lots of different names, but I'll try and maybe distill it down to two main factors, right? So you've got corps and boards. Really, at the end of the day, you're either setting up a corporation or a services board. And so all those things can kind of come under different names and have different tweaks, and of course, all the governance that changes it. And your corps tend to be around businesses and functional areas that are asset heavy, and often are kind of aligned to something where you can move your debt off books, and you might even have a kind of a rate base where you could recover that, electricity being the obvious case. The services boards are usually ones where it doesn't have that, softer services, human and social services. And so those would, I would say, be the two main buckets. And there's lots of permutations under both. And so that I would kind of call uses my two kind of signposts in terms of what you're looking at. So I think everything you mentioned there would be considered a corp. And I sorry, I don't remember every one you did mention. And anything else would be kind of a service board, which you have both of. I mean, you guys are kind of unique that way in the province, that you're a bit ahead of others, but it tends to flow that way.
Thank you. And one other question. If we were to move to make the multi-service corporation, or board, would we then have, a board, or would it be something different? And would that, because right now we have 3 entities with 3 boards, group of different people. There are some common factors in terms of the mayor and the CAO sitting on those various boards. But would it allow for a more unified entity to do things more efficiently and effectively?
Go ahead,
No,
Josh.
go ahead, Josh.
No, oh, sorry. That would be the working theory. We'd have to dig into kind of all the, legal and bylaws to make sure that you're kind of checking boxes. But then in the end of the day, the benefit attributed to that model would be more of that alignment and consolidation around the oversight. So you might still have like kind of separate entities under that one umbrella, right, legally, because you just might need to for tax reasons or legal reasons. But from a governance and oversight perspective, you would have that one umbrella structure that would provide the oversight in a practical sense for all of them.
Thank you.
Anyone else, questions or comments? I know it's a lot to take in. Councillor Drodge.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just to follow up on Councillor Waters' comment. So if we went under a one united umbrella, and would those corporations lose their debt capacity, or do they remain the same?
Well, I think they get combined under one organization.
Yeah.
Unless I'm wrong about that, Josh.
No, I think you would. I think you're right, Mohammed. That would be that kind of an enlarged debt capacity amongst or between them all.
I would just add to that, Josh, that it depends on who the issuing entity is. I've seen cases where the parent company sits on top, but specifically one of the subsidiaries issues debt. And this particularly relates, for example, to some of the regulated versus non-regulated businesses, because the risk profile between regulated and non-regulated is very different. It's more beneficial for the company to issue debt under the regulated umbrella to reduce the cost of debt. So it's a choice. The board can decide on it. The corporation can decide on it. But generally, I think I agree with Josh. It usually moves up unless there are these nuanced cases where it's beneficial for the subsidiary to do.
But it's consolidated, right? Whether it's held by a sub or moved up, I think is okay.
And just a follow-up question on that. So just a live example. So if In-Services had a debt capacity of 100 or 200 million, and we got into a project, something like the Orbit that cost $500 or $600 million in infrastructure, if it was one whole company, does that mean something like InPower Enterprise would be able to assist with their debt capacity to help pay for In-Services debt capacity?
I'm going to give that one to Babak just because I want to make sure I don't overstep.
Regulated, unregulated part, yeah.
Yeah, the debt capacity, I go with your example, Councillor. If you have a 500 million investment, the creditor are looking at the investment as a whole when you're issuing debt on it and they review it. So it really doesn't matter whether that sits under the corp or under the subsidiary. The asset itself is the thing that generates the value, and therefore each of these entities theoretically is able to do that. I go back to my previous comment that the difference is which one of them is able to get more favorable terms for issuing the debt in the market for you. So depending on the situation, if the parent has a better credit rating, you may want to use the debt capacity of the parent. If the subsidiary has a better risk profile for what they do, you may shift it down to the subsidiary. But both of them can do it because the asset itself has the value and it sits on both of the balance sheet for the parent and the sub.
Final call for questions. Seeing none, I want to thank all the folks at EY for being with us today and walking us through this. And I'm going to pass it over to CAO Jershaw, but I'm just going to thank him for suggesting we go down this path and doing this review. Sometimes you have to step back and to see you can't see the forest for the trees, and I think we need to make sure that we aren't just doing things the way we've always done them, but do them the way that is best for us, and to relook at our priorities and why we're doing what we are doing. The one thing I would say is that as far as the three entities are concerned, I'm very proud of the service that we get from InPower. And I know that our residents are very satisfied with that. And I also want to say that doing this review has nothing to do with the quality of the service of any of the three corporations. Your water is safe to drink. Your wastewater is taken care of efficiently. We just had an in-services meeting today where we did get our water and wastewater quality reports done, and know that we're getting wonderful reports back from MECP. So I don't want anybody to construe this as, a reason to fix something that's broken. It's a reason to always review. I think Mr. Cole called it governance hygiene. It's a way to look at what we're doing and can we do it better. If there's a way to do it better, continuous improvement is always the way we should go. So with that, I'll pass it on to CAO Jershaw for next steps.
Thanks, Mayor Dolan. And I will also thank the whole team from EY, Mo, Tamina, Josh, Babak, and others who participated. It's been really a year long of fairly intensive work and a lot of collaboration with the utility companies. And I want to thank Danny and all of his team members for their participation in this process as well. So thank you, EY, for your support in this. And so picking up on your comment, Mayor Dolan, I think part of what's really important here is for this council, at this point in time, to really be clear about what your objectives are for each of these three companies. And I guess, one way to think about the current state assessment that's part of the EY report is it was looking at the objectives that have been set in the past. So when In-Services was created by this council in 2015, there were objectives at the time. People had an idea what they thought In-Services should do. And similarly, with InPower and Enterprises, this council has set direction and expectations for what those companies should do. And, this is a great point in time in 2024 for you to set your objectives for these companies. And as the mayor said, I think that's a very normal, healthy, good thing to do. Not to be on autopilot, but to actually really take ownership in a meaningful sense of these three companies that you own and that the town owns. So in terms of next steps, and I say this also for those who may be in the audience today or watching online, today is not a decision-making point for council. We have further points of engagement to come. So I will call out that next Tuesday on February 21st, there will be another special council meeting where folks will have an opportunity to reflect on what they've heard tonight and bring forward comments, delegations. I expect we will hear from Danny Prasad, the CEO of our utility companies. I've heard from a couple of board members who'd like to share their views with council. So next Tuesday will be an opportunity to continue this conversation in open session and continue the dialogue. At this point in time, my expectation is that we would begin to seek council's direction with respect to the options you've been presented towards the end of March. And as we approach that point, that's where, we will help support council with advice from town staff. And as the deputy mayor, mentioned earlier, we want to make sure you have the information you need to make good decisions. Even if that decision means we need to do some more homework before we make a final decision. right? Like that tax issue that we talked about as one example. So today is a milestone in a process that started last March. I hope Council has found the report from EY helpful, but there's certainly an opportunity to continue the dialogue next week and to ask questions and make sure you have in your minds what you need to set a direction for 2024 and beyond.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Geist.
Wednesday, sorry. I
Wednesday,
misspoke.
February the 21st.
Thank you. Sorry.
So with that then, I'll ask a mover and a seconder, please, for the recommendation that's on the screen. This is being received for information tonight. Councillor Drodge, Councillor Zanella. All those in favor of the recommendation? That is carried. Thank you so much for being here with us this evening. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll now go to the confirming bylaw for the special council meeting for tonight. And I would ask for a mover and a seconder, Deputy Mayor Fowler and Councillor Constantine. All those in favor? And a mover and a seconder, please, for adjournment at 6:40 p.m. Councillor Richardson, Councillor Drodge. All those in favor? That is carried. So thank you, everyone. We're adjourned now. We will be back at 7 p.m. for our regular council meeting for this evening.